Good morning, everybody, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to spend a little bit of time going over some of the things that we have been doing with managing weather and some of the things we'd like to do. Towards the end also, I'd like to give a little bit of an outline of some of the possible future developments. What we're looking at, this is part of what Razvan started yesterday with the 7-point plan, the mitigations. This is the weather arm of that. But we're concentrating on it very much from an operational rather than a conceptual point of view. What works or does not work in operations. We're at the first steps of it. We did some stuff last year, which I'll go into. We're going to continue that this year, but we're at the first steps, and therefore we're very much open to suggestions, improvements, and dare I say it, even a little bit of criticism. So please feel free, after myself and Gianni have spoken, to be forthright and robust in your criticisms, feedback. Which one do I press? Okay. Let's talk amongst ourselves for a little. Here we go. Okay, you've seen this slide before, unfortunately, but okay, I'm not going to dwell on it for too long. You've had a lot of statistics, but I did want to point out a couple of things. Weather, as Gianni said yesterday, is the biggest single weather generator, but on average it's generating about 25% of all en route and airport delay. It's actually a little bit more for en route. And the actual raw minutes of delay has significantly increased. Holger yesterday mentioned the early start, and unfortunately I don't have a mouse here, but if you look in May there, indeed there was a bit of a spike. The red there is 2018, the green is the year before. Thank you, Claire. So yes, indeed, there was a bit of an early start to it, but you can see there that really end of May and then into June, it was awful there in terms of convective activity. We also had spikes in August. September actually was relatively calm. But the point there really is that it's that squared off area there, the convective activity, that we need to manage better. But we have to be realistic here as well. There is a general, as we've already been discussing and will discuss further, there's a general capacity crunch, for want of a better word, in the network at the moment. There's a limit to what we can do. The increase in delay in weather is a reflection of the fact that weather is more intense and there are climatic issues there, but it's also a reflection of the general lack of capacity, and we have to be realistic about what we can and cannot do. Okay, thank you. So what is better weather management? What does it look like? Well, we've discussed at various fora. We ourselves in this room last year, we had a weather forum with a wide variety of stakeholders. We've discussed with the aircraft operators through the AOG, with various ANSPs, through all the various fora that we have, to get an idea of what they would like to see and what it actually looks like. So the first thing really is advanced planning, advanced collaboration. Holger yesterday, again, I'm not picking on you, Holger, it's just that your presentation actually made a couple of really valid points there. That lack of accuracy that Holger was talking about, and we've had various quotes from people. I'm not going to do anything until I see the aircraft moving on my screen, and then I'll start putting on regulations. That's too late. I don't have an accurate forecast. I can't make a decision without this. I can't. Okay, all of those things we're looking at addressing, but we need to start planning in advance. We need to start collaborating in advance. My son, one of my sons, had a little bit of struggle with examinations and stuff and revising for them. So I put a big poster on his wall. He loved me for it. It's a quote from NASA. It says, I better remember it now. Failure to plan is planning to fail. I don't think it helped my son, but it certainly was going to have to help us. That's the sort of thing we need to be looking at. If we plan for these things, then we can come out of it with a better result at the end of it. Improved situational awareness is not just enough to know what's coming, but we also know how it's going to affect us. It's how it's going to affect us, but more importantly, it's how it's going to affect our neighbours, looking over that garden wall. So we all need to know what the situation is. It may not be something that we think we need to know at a particular time, but actually having that just lodged in the back of your mind gives you a much better feeling of confidence in that the network is running well. Measures applied and removed in good time. So again, weather regulations, as I alluded to before, are notorious for having short lead-in times. We would like to see, I think generally, it's best to put on regulations with 2 to 3 hours in advance. Weather regulations are nearly always less than 60 minutes. We need to look at applying them and removing them in good time. What that gives is a much fairer distribution of delay. If you put the regulation on really late, then of course a significant number of the aircraft are already airborne, so those that are on the ground have to take a much larger proportion of that delay. Often, of course, in order to maintain the capacity levels that are safe, you have to push down the rates that are acceptable. So all in all, it becomes an issue with stability, with fair delay distribution. Put them on in good time, take them off in good time. The other one that often happens is the recovery, where we end up forgetting about regulations or not really looking at how we need to recover from a particular event, and as a result we lose capacity there. So that's something else that needs to be addressed. The next 2 points, fewer regulations, fewer changes to regulations. I think Gianni and Jed yesterday were talking about this is really about the predictability and the volatility. Fewer regulations, easy for me to sit up here and say that, of course. It's much harder to make it happen in real life. Something that Gianni talked about yesterday was collapsed sectors. And there is certainly that element of staffing and collapsed sectors and such like. But there are occasions, particularly with weather, where regulating collapsed sectors and therefore not having to regulate having two regulations but one is actually beneficial, where you would you keep those sectors split, or those sectors may well be combined, but it keeps all the reroutes within one area, and actually you get a capacity benefit. Those things can happen and do happen, and that would give us fewer regulations, and fewer regulations means that it's much easier for us in NM to improve delay, and of course there is even a chance that we can improve overall delay. Fewer changes, I think, is self-evident, but it's all about reducing volatility. If we have a good plan, then it's much more likely that we're going to reduce the amount of changes to that plan and therefore reduce the volatility. The last point there, better rerouting. We talked about things like this yesterday with RAD restrictions. We're talking a little bit here about what the FAA does. Those of you familiar with how the FAA do weather, manage weather, one of the things they do is their famous playbooks, where they would have pre-canned routes that they would conference and discuss and then apply depending upon where the weather is. Some of these reroutes are enormous, and we're not sure how well it would work in Europe, but I think we have to look at that. And it's something that, and I think Ludovic was talking yesterday, and Jeffrey from EasyJet were talking about routes that we would put on and plan for. We would plan for them strategically. Thank you. English isn't my first language, as you might notice. So we would plan for them strategically, but apply them pre-tactically. The reason for that is, again, what Jeffrey was saying yesterday, that many aircraft operators have a great deal of difficulty taking advantage of RAD disablings on the day, so we would have to look at it pre-tactically. So those are things we need to look at a little bit more. So how do we achieve it? Well, we've talked about, again, based on feedback from people and some of the things we've already done, we're talking about mainly convective activity. How do we achieve that? Well, weather crosses borders, so we need to take a network-centric approach. The Weather Forum from last year was quite keen for the network manager to take that role, but however it's done, it needs to be done from looking over each other, looking over your garden fence, looking at what's coming, and how it may affect you. So it has to be done from a network level. Summer and winter weather, they are different. They affect the network in different ways. Summer weather is, as I said, mainly convective activity, and it is about earlier collaboration and planning for it. Winter weather is less of an en route issue, much more of an airport issue. Someone once said that when a certain airport sneezes, the whole network catches a cold. I don't believe that. I think we can have major airports having issues which are events for them, but from a network perspective, it's relatively easy to handle. But when you get 2, 3, 4, or 5 major airports having having weather events, then it becomes a network issue that needs managing from network level. So it's a case of just looking at the differences there and being aware that we don't need the same approach. The last point there, I think, is key, and is possibly the most important one, and that is that everyone needs the same data, the single view weather forecast. Every ANSP has its own Met provider, and what we need to look at is how we can use that expertise but at network level. So we're looking at ways, and I'll talk about that in the next couple of slides, of having a single view with all of the Met providers contributing to that so that everybody can be a part of it, and it will allow us to collaborate together. We need to start planning earlier, better at day -3, but certainly day -1. Just let me turn over my notes to make sure I'm on the right page. I am indeed. Day -3, no one's expecting regulations to be put on at day -3. Nobody's expecting regulations to be put on at day -1. But we are expecting planning at day -1. But day -3, you can be looking at staffing, you can be looking at various other different aspects of it and seeing how potential weather can affect the network. I know many airports do this. There's no reason why we can't be doing it at an ANSP and a network level. And then, of course, we need to discuss things. At the moment, it's really a bit cumbersome with teleconferences. I'll go into that a little bit later on. But we do need to find good methods of collaborating and discussing day -1 on the day of operation, updating, so that we can all understand each other's limitations, all understand the issues, and see how things are changing. And then being able to, again, it's that situational awareness. Different stakeholders have different needs, different time horizons. There are some NSPs, for example, have finished their pre-tactical planning during the morning of a day -1. There's others that continue into the afternoon. Aircraft operators need certain information day -1. But they also want more updates on their day of operation. So we need to be cognizant of all of the different requirements and see if we can put in procedures that will that address as many of those as possible. This point, I always put the most important points last. I always like to build up to them. The commitment and buy-in from all stakeholders. This is key. It's very easy for us to sit in a room like this and go, oh, yes, that's very good. But it has to trickle down to the operational guys. When you're actually sitting there on the day, people actually have to commit and actually take part in these procedures. So when the procedures that we are currently designing, we expect that commitment, and if it's not there, then we really have to be aware. We have to call it out when it doesn't happen. If it doesn't happen. So what have we done so far? Well, we talked about the summer cross-border collaboration procedure. That happened between August and September of last year. It was just the beginning, just the first steps. What happened was that we managed to get a single view for the ANSPs, from the ANSPs involved. So we were looking at NATS in the southeast of England, the Benelux nations, and Germany. So it was Karlsruhe, Maastricht, and NATS who were involved. We had the single weather view was provided by UK Met Office, Deutsche Wetterdienst, the KMI, through EUROCONTROL and EUROCONTROL. So we had that collaboration, and we were able to get a forecast every morning, day -1, which we then would have a look at, discuss internally, and decide whether we needed further collaboration. If we did need further collaboration, then we would call a conference and discuss, the idea being that we would A, raise situational awareness, B, come up with some basic planning, and then in the background we would start looking at what gaps there were in the process. So we did that, and we had limited success. We had some success, but it was very limited. I think the main thing was that we did manage to identify some of the gaps that we need to carry forward into the next iteration of the process. Let me just go back there for a second. So what were some of the gaps? What were some of the things that we saw? Well, we didn't do as much conferencing as we should have done. We didn't do as much collaboration as perhaps we should have done. We were Stand by 1 second, I apologise for this. Okay. We discovered that really that the forecast that we had was perhaps, it wasn't as detailed as we needed, so we need to look at that for the future. And so here, we need to improve the forecast. We need to update with tactical information. And I think that's a challenge that we're facing with our colleagues from EU MetNet, who are actually helping us manage the single view forecast. We would like to see 3 to 4 accuracy. I think that's the sort of thing that that Holger was alluding to. So what we would like to be able to say is 3 to 4 hours out, you are going to have weather in this particular sector group. I think it's a bit too much at the moment to be asking for saying that you will get a storm in the Nattenheim sector at 14:32 and it will leave at 15:34. Well, that's not going to happen, but we can look at ways of improving the accuracy. We'll come back to that. We're expanding the scope for this year to include RAS. But then 2020 and beyond, we would like to expand it. So ultimately, it becomes a network issue. One of the issues that we had, as I said before, was that we have had difficulty in knowing when we need to collaborate. Is the forecast such that there's going to be an issue in the network? Is it a cross-border issue? Or is it just something that's localized and that it doesn't really need us to look at it from a network perspective? So we need to look better at defining those triggers for collaboration. And of course, the output from any collaborative event, I hesitate to say conference at this stage because that is what we're doing at the moment, but I think we need to move away from that for lots of reasons. But we do need to have a structured output. We need to understand what it is that aircraft operators want. And one of the things that came out of a recent feedback session, which was talked about yesterday, and I'd like to take the honour of mentioning it for the first time today, is a U261. One of the things that aircraft operators said was what they would like actually is a resume, a summary of what is expected in terms of weather in the network the next day and its likely impact, because it would help them with 261 claims. Okay, it's not quite something that we thought of, and it's not something that is necessarily directly, but if that's what our customers want, then we should work towards providing that sort of thing. But in any case, we need to have a structured output. We need to give people what they want, and we need to improve that operational level commitment, as I mentioned before. Holger yesterday, and again, I'm sorry, Holger, but you did mention yesterday about this accuracy issue, about wanting to know when the storms are going to come and all the rest of it. The state of the art in forecasting, as far as I'm aware at the moment, I've been told by my forecasting friends, is not really able to do that at the moment. So we need to manage risk. We need to be able to say, we're not sure whether this is going to, we're 90% sure, we're 50% sure, we're 30% sure, whatever it might be, but we need to be managing those risks, and we need to dare to actually make a few mistakes occasionally so that we can learn. There are parts of the network that have some very good practices with that and have done some work on it, and we need to learn from those. So there's some work to be done there. And to encourage that as well, delay optimization. It's something that we've used in the past and has shown that if you have good delay optimization procedures, strictly controlled, that they can aid collaboration. We need to look at, I would like to be able to do that with weather. I appreciate it's controversial, but I think it does encourage better collaboration. It encourages people to apply measures in better time because they know that there is an insurance policy if mistakes are made or if weather doesn't turn up, etc., etc. There are other procedures that are coming in for next summer. The Munich weather procedure is being resurrected for 2019 with some changes to it. We will be looking at that to see whether or not it might be applicable to other parts of the network as well. And there is the Alpine adverse weather procedure where we provide some facilitation services as well. So, what of the future? Really, weather is just another capacity constraint. We tend to plan for airspace changes. We plan for capacity constraints with too much traffic or staffing issues. We're less good at planning for weather. We tend to be very reactive to it for all the good reasons that have been mentioned in various other fora. But it does need to become much more embedded in part of daily planning rather than just this add-on, oh, there might be a bit of weather and so we'll deal with that when it arrives. So we have to push this idea of starting at day -3, day -2, day -1, and on the day of operations, managing convective weather from a network level. As I said before, winter weather is a different problem, managed more locally, but the network should get involved when there are major events and feeding into that larger network view. The single weather view, as I said, we're bringing in nowcasting elements, tactical updates, and that allows for the collaboration, seamless planning. That will have to cover large parts of the network. Core area at the very least, but there's no reason why eventually it shouldn't be covering the whole of the network in collaboration with our Met colleagues. As I said, planning at day -3. The idea with this, and I don't want to over-labour it, but the idea is that it's just part of what we do. And at the moment, it's not. At the moment, it's an add-on, it's an afterthought, and that has to change. The pre-planning, as I mentioned, it's hindered by that lack of capacity. One of the issues we have at the moment is simply, if we want to reroute traffic, either pre-tactically or tactically, in the height of summer, there are few places for us to go that are not already capacity constrained, not already regulated, or about to be regulated. The more of that planning we can do with accuracy at day -1, the better. And of course, we have to allow for the complexity of the RAD, and we have to coordinate that in advance. At the moment, our processes for 2019 will not directly include airline and airport input. The reason for that is simply we want to make sure we have a better, robust product for you to get involved with before we ask for your commitment, because we know you're busy. But we will ask at various points throughout the summer for expertise in particular areas. But eventually, I would like to see regular airline and airport input. And I foresee the NM, the network manager, playing a very much a role as a communications hub, very much a role as making sure that any decisions that are made by whomever makes them are communicated effectively and quickly with those people that need to know them. So we need to use technology. We need to eliminate, as far as possible, the cumbersome teleconference and look at different ways of doing it. There are some best practices that we should try and learn from and try and use whatever comes along in the future as a way of making sure that you get what you need when you need it. That's all I've got for the moment. I'm happy to answer questions, but we'll do that after Gianni's presentation. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this.